But it was wonderful. We started in Rome and we worked our way through, and one of our stops was San Giovanni Rotondo, and it was beautiful. I mean, to be able to see the confessional where Padre Pio heard so many confessions, and to feel the graces of just being close to such a holy man and see his tomb. And Father Peter and I were talking, the new tomb that's there is absolutely gorgeous. It's adorned in a very bright gold. It almost feels as if you're walking into a heavenly area, because the mosaics there are amazing. And we were able to stay and pray a little bit in front of the remains of Padre Pio, and just share some time with him. And we had Mass there. And one of the great things was at Mass, they had his roommate while he was residing there, and he actually celebrated Mass for us. And then he brought some of the relics of Padre Pio, so his actual gloves, and he gave us a blessing with the relic of Padre Pio's glove. And then I, of course, snuck over to the side and wanted to thank him personally, and he actually gave me a personal blessing with it. So it was a beautiful and very touching experience. So.
And we just had the relics brought to St. Patrick's Cathedral, and I wanted to mention that the gentleman who is really paying for our radio station right now, who funded it very generously, Mr. Matone, was the man who was also responsible for bringing the relics to St. Patrick's in New York City.
Oh, wow.
And we're actually looking forward to having his grandson on next week, also with Carol Rubano. And a word about Carol, we have Living Waters Center, which is a counseling center, and we are having a very exciting thing happening today. I'd like to tell you about that. It's going to start at 1 o'clock, 1 to 4, and it's Brother Paul. I think many people on Long Island kind of have become familiar with Brother Paul now. You've had him at your parish, Father?
That's right, he was there. Quite a good crowd showed up. And was he at St. Elizabeth's today?
He's going to be at Living Waters, but he will be in the church at St. Elizabeth's. We're sponsoring it. We're a Catholic counseling center on Long Island, and we'll have confessions. We will have prayers to the Divine Mercy, and one of the most wonderful things about Brother Paul is his very down-to-earth, everyday stories that he tells about how he came into this in the beginning. He was actually an extremely successful businessman who was really kind of tapped on the shoulder by the Lord through somebody who was is actually now up for canonization, Maria Esperanza. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of an exciting story. Are you guys familiar with Brother Paul? Do you know about him? So he is going to be there today. So we would like to invite everyone. It's a free will offering. Nobody would be turned back. We have plenty of room.
Yeah, I wanted to mention too, I was prayed over by Brother Paul, and I've been to 2 seminars, and it's just been really life-changing. You really feel like God's mercy, and like you said, his very down-to-earth stories are just very real, and just how God touches us in our very simple humanity, and it's just very captivating stories. You just feel more drawn to the faith just by listening to his stories, and I highly recommend it. He's a very approachable man, and just very blessed, and I guess God called him and qualified the call. And he went through most of his life, and this kind of came out of nowhere. And it just kind of got turned around, and he started a healing ministry in New Jersey, and very connected as well with Padre Pio and Maria Esperanza, and so I think it's incredible. I'm just realizing today is the feast day of Padre Pio. He's also a Third Order Franciscan, so there's a lot of connections here, and if you feel inspired, I really do recommend this. If you could get over to Melville today, it'll change your life. It really will.
Yeah, and he's got such a great sense of humor, and he kind of gets you to have the feeling that anybody can hear from God. The Lord's trying to talk to all of us all the time, and he kind of reinforces that concept that he was very resistant to God's call, which that's kind of a nice thing to hear too.
Yeah, he was just married man just living his life, and he got sick, and like I think that was a big changing point in his life as well. He was in the hospital, and then yeah, slowly for surely.
Well, as St. Paul says, choose the weak and make them strong, or you choose the little ones, the lowly, the ones that people consider as nothing, and you make them into something. So like Padre Pio follows along those lines. He was very sick when he was a young man. They delayed his ordination and so forth like that, and it didn't look like he was going to have very great prospects. And then when the supernatural phenomena came, they wanted to remove him from the limelight, so they put him out what they thought was a really rural backwater, in the region of Julia, in the region of Bari, there out in the mountains. So when you get there, you see the little church that was there when he got there, the big church that they had to build when the crowds began to come, and now the tremendous tombs. So you got 3 places you got to visit, each one more interesting than the other, So like he really fulfills the little proverb, they say, build a better mousetrap and the world will be the path to your door. You've probably heard that one.
No,
So we'll hear confessions like Padre Pio, and the world will be the path to your door too, with healings and revelations coming. So the world beat a path to this tiny place and put it on the map and made it famous, all because of him. So if you do, as I say, with those friends of Dario, you do get a chance to go to Italy, don't miss out on Padre Pio.
He was also a little frightening in the confessional, wasn't he, Father Pio?
Well, he read souls. That was the thing. The Lord gave him the gift of reading souls. So there were famous moments in some of the video presentations they've done. They tried to dramatize them, where he refused to give absolution to certain people who conveniently for themselves omitted certain sins. And in most instances, the people eventually came back and confessed that sin. Padre Pio held firm and didn't administer absolution until really in a certain sense, the Holy Spirit allowed him to know that now the person was repentant. They needed that extra step, and Padre Pio's refusal to give the absolution was that extra step.
I remember that famous story about the devil. I don't know, was he setting fire to the bed? Do you know that one, Severio?
I think I know. Like the devil would torment Padre Pio while he was trying to sleep.
Yeah.
He would throw stuff at him or
Yeah.
shake his bed, and
yeah.
he wouldn't be able to sleep.
Right.
But Padre Pio kept on praying the rosary, kept on just trying.
Yeah.
He didn't let the devil get to him.
A famous comment actually attributed to him during one of those sieges was, "Oh, it's only in you," and he turned over. Did they tell you stories? Did you hear any great stories?
Well, actually, one of my, I guess, first familiarizations with Padre Pio was from someone here on Long Island, Anthony Felina, who had a very close personal encounter with Padre Pio, and I believe his encounter actually helped the canonization efforts of Padre Pio.
Really?
And he was speaking to, I was teaching 7th grade faith formation at St. Catherine's, and he came and he gave a talk about his experiences and his beating of cancer through the intervention of Padre Pio, and it was a beautiful story. And then from there, I started reading more and more about Padre Pio, and it was nice to meet someone who had an experience with a saint. That was very interesting. And actually, unfortunately, Anthony's he's in the hospital right now. So if we can ask the parishioners to pray for him. So yeah, anytime I think of Padre Pio, I also think of him just because of his connection.
We had him at St. Francis. The car that he gave Padre Pio, who showed up, as the story goes, as kind of a homeless person or a street person that Anthony befriended. That car is now available to visit up in Edmiston, New York, at the Rosa Mystica Shrine.
Oh, wow.
Up there, so that Noreen Bonsuel and her group are watching over that vehicle right now. It's kind of a third-class relic, I guess. So something like that. Yes.
Can you tell us a distilled version of that story?
Oh, geez, I don't know if I'd even be able to do it justice. But essentially, he was diagnosed with cancer, and he was driving somewhere, I believe, to visit his daughter, and he sees he sees who he thought was a homeless person, and he just felt called to pick him up. And he picked him up, and he said they sat in the car, they had a conversation, and he said he felt as if this man knew him, and he said to him, "Oh, you're sick. I can see that you're sick." And he said, "Can I pray with you and pray over you. And he does, and as he does that, he reached over and he touched him right at the side where I guess the cancer was.
Really?
And he said he immediately felt something, and then he got out of the, he said, okay, you can let me off here. And he got out, and he said, I remember this part, that Anthony was concerned with the way the traffic was going, obviously, on a busy road, and he looked in one direction to ensure the cars weren't there, and when he turned around, Padre Pio wasn't there. And he didn't know it was Padre Pio at the time, and he woke up the next morning, he felt different. They went to the doctor, and the doctor said, your cancer's gone. And not only was your cancer gone, but there wasn't any evidence as if the cancer even had been there. And he didn't know who it was until it turned out his daughter had gone to, I believe, like a prayer group, and he saw the card that his daughter had and said, that was the man I picked up.
Oh,
And
my
it was
goodness.
Padre Pio.
That's
So I hope I'm
great.
doing it justice. I know
Yeah,
there's
no, that's
a lot more
great.
detail
Yeah.
there, but
No,
it
that's
was
great.
a very
That's
beautiful
perfect.
story of how
Yeah.
a
How
saint can come.
amazing.
Yeah.
How incredible that is,
Did the cancer come back? That's why he's in the hospital again, or was that somebody?
No,
else?
I'm not sure. I mean, I know he's in the hospital now,
Yeah.
but
But he's been healed from many,
Yes.
many, right?
Yes.
Many
Different
years.
things.
yeah.
I know as an RN, when I worked in hospital, we had a different priests come in. At that time, the charismatic renewal had just started, and so some of our priests and seminarians would come in and pray for healing. And what I noticed was that many times the healing is real, and it lasted for years and years and years. And sometimes the original situation would return, but meanwhile the person had lived 20 or 25 years, in a healing place. My husband just recently passed, and we had that experience with him, that he kept making comebacks, and really, I guess you would say 7 years more than what they predicted. So thank God. I think that, and again, in healthcare and in mental health care, it's very scary out there right now, because everyone wants to pull the plug and end everything and make it very convenient sometimes. And I think we have to really always pray that the Lord will have his way with people, and that we will all have every second of life that God intends for us, because I really believe that so much of that is used for redemptive suffering. We don't even know. We don't even, right? Do you agree with that, John?
Oh, indeed. I think that not only that acceptance of what we encounter, but the embracing of what we encounter is so important. It strikes me as one of the beautiful things that we receive. It struck me several years ago. We received a page in the middle of the night that one of my youngest son's peers in school had passed away quite suddenly. He wasn't a wild kid. He wasn't out drinking and driving. He just he got sick, his spleen burst, and he was gone.
Wow.
Just like that. And it was such a grievous, sad moment. It was a family's firstborn son. I can only think of when my son was born, of how special that was, my very first child. Of that, holding him for the first time, and now he's gone. I just couldn't even imagine. I could think of his mother sharing the great pain of Mary at the cross. And it struck me how, when such moments of tragedy come, they force us to evaluate our worldview. And we can come out in several different places. There is the worldview that it is what it is, and we accept it. Very, very Buddhist point of view. It is what it is, and we accept it, and it brings us to peace. And that's okay. Often in Christianity, we somehow twist things around, and we wind up with different worldviews. We think of this vindictive God. God, why did you do this to me? Or this capricious God. Or this guilt. What did I do wrong to deserve this? But really in Christianity, we have the most beautiful worldview, when we can look at all the world and recognize it all flows from love. One way or the other, everything ties back to the God who is love. And so I can look at these events that happen in life and say, not only it is what it is, but it is good, that it's touched with love. And so I not only say, it is what it is, and I accept it, leading to peace. But I say it is what it is. It's touched with God's love, and so I can embrace it, leading to joy. And that's such a different and wonderful worldview, to have that faith and that trust, to know that however this is shaped, the end is not the end. That's just a transition. That's walking into the next room. That life only makes sense in the space of eternity. When we understand that it's all wrapped in a love that didn't have to make all of this to begin with, then we really can embrace it. And it leads us not just to peace, but to joy. And that's such a beautiful thing.
That's a beautiful elucidation of the whole process of really transitioning into eternity and, you know, everything that means for us. I love that. And the joy, I think the joy is in the trusting the Lord rather than the outcome. You know, so many people say in counseling, oh, I prayed, and, you know, they'll either say, well, God, I trust God. He's going to take care of it. It's going to work out great. Scary. Or, you know, I prayed and it didn't work out. And neither one of those things are, of course, accurate, because our trust, I'm sure you'll agree, John, has to be placed in the Lord, not in the outcome, just like the guys in the furnace, right? They said.
Well, even more so, I think we can take it more deeply, that if we look at this extraordinary plan of God, who made us in love and for love and to love and nothing else, that it strikes me that we're called to the love of heaven, but we are not ready for the love of heaven until we are ready to fully embrace the love of the voluntary poverty of the incarnation and the voluntary suffering of the cross. And so it seems to me that in life there are three things that are inseparable. And to me, this was the last major piece that fell into place for me to understand the world. That the three things that are inseparable are love, freedom, and suffering. You know, that if the goal is to bring us to infinite love as finite beings, to imitate, not to imitate, to be the love of God, because that's the only love that's eternally sustainable, to live forever, then we have, how does God bring us finite beings to infinite love? And for love to be perfect, it has to be perfectly free. I can't love because, otherwise when the because ends, the love fails and it's not eternally sustainable. And the freedom of our love is really built in the crucible of suffering. That when we are able to take our suffering and to be able to say, let me not just endure this, let me not just carry this, but let me embrace this, because I know suffering is salvific, that I can embrace my suffering willingly, voluntarily, for the sake of others, then in the tiniest way, we're allowed to imitate the love of God in the crucifixion. That there's only so much we can learn about love through knowledge in our heads. That ultimately we learn about love through experience in our bodies. And when we can do that, by doing, we learn and we build love, by imitating the love of the cross to voluntarily embrace our sufferings in love for others. And that shows the freedom of love and the perfection of love. And it's such an amazing thing. You know, if I'm often struck by the atheist hymn, you know, praise God for whom tornadoes blow, whatever it is, or this idea of why suffering in the world. And there's so much of it that it needs to be there for a reason. The one who subjected the world to futility and hope. And that just struck me. This is part of the plan. To build perfect love, we must be free. And our freedom is built in suffering. As in my little way, how I put things together.
Well, it is a real the synthesis that you're creating there. But of course, that'll, you know, the greatest saints and minds will be working on that one for a long time. Why did God, a good God, a loving God, not create a world without suffering? And as you say, the freedom to love back has to be. You have to go through. There has to be a price to be paid somehow in order to break through to choose God. And Padre Pio and St. Francis both had the stigmata. So there you see it's exemplified, sharing in the sufferings of Christ is exemplified even visually and in the pains they experience. But in a certain sense, all of God's friends, all of Jesus' friends, have to go through some kind of a stigmata. They have to go through in order to reach the point where they're really choosing God, and not simply just basking in an eternal vacation, so to speak, where there's no pressure, no pain, no decisions to be made. God figured everything out in advance, So I want to thank you for some of those things, and that brought it back to Padre Pio again with the stigmata and all the rest of it. So thank you.
And it's also a great segue into our first question, because I loved what you said about John, about how really, we love because, when the because ends, that is so crucial. I do marriage counseling constantly, marriages that have just started having issues, that are finishing having issues and going into divorce, and that are in the middle of issues. So all kinds of variations of marriage counseling, but I find that that's such a key word, because it's like, well, I can't do this anymore because he's lost 14 jobs in a row and I can't do it, or I can't do it because of this or because of that. We hear this all the time, and the because is part of why I think our question today is actually so essential to be looked at. And the question is?
Okay, the question is regarding living together before marriage, and what the church's view is on that, and as well as going away on vacation before marriage, and just regarding the relationship before marriage between a man and a woman. Mm-hmm.
And just to get some backgrounds here, Severio, you've done pre-Cana, your wife and yourself, so
Yes.
you run into this kind of thing all the time.
Yes.
And John?
We run into it all.
And John, you teach scripture?
Yes, I do have the Bible study at St. Vincent, and then also RCIA, and similarly with pre-Cana. So often we find people coming who are in these relationships, and how do we present the truth which is not compromisable in a way that does not drive them away from hearing the truth? The truth is not enough. Jesus Christ was full of grace and truth. That we need to be able to present the truth in a way that reaches into the hearts and souls of others, rather than closes their ears so that they don't hear it.
Absolutely.
And that's been the great challenge.
Absolutely.
And it's an even greater challenge in our day when we have lost the concept of sin, that we can do things wrong, and we deal with a world of such presuppositions. When we discuss this commandment, we talk about how for most of the history of the church, sexual sins were considered the least important. You see this in the Purgatorio, right, in Dante, because they were considered sins of weakness, as opposed to distortions of the way we think, like pride or avarice. But today that's changed. It really has become a distortion in the way we think. And so the challenge we face is that the logic of those who promote a world of promiscuity, of all the things that are such hot topics in our society, whether it's cohabitation, whether it's gay marriage, whether it's transgender issues, the logic isn't necessarily wrong. And that's why if we keep arguing about logic, we do nothing but beat each other over the heads. It's the presuppositions that are wrong, the premises. And so we have to deal with those. And it comes back to the issue of love. That what I find so often is that we have made the false assumption about what love is. And so we define love in terms of self-fulfillment. That I've met someone, they make me feel special, they make me feel complete. I feel wonderful when I'm with them. I feel valuable, I feel esteemed, and therefore I'm in love. And this is all built around self-fulfillment, as opposed to true love, which is rooted in self-sacrifice, of self-giving. Now, when we take that to human sexuality, it manifests itself right away. That if I view love as self-sacrifice, then I can look at two important areas when it comes to our relationships sexually. The first is fidelity, and how we misunderstand fidelity, that we're faithful to the person to whom we will be faithful before we've ever met them. And so if I'm in a relationship with someone who is not my committed life partner yet, in freedom, I choose for love to say, even if I want to, and even if you want to, for the sake of the person to whom I will be faithful for all of my life, we won't. And if I'm only thinking about you and me, we've drawn the circle of love too small. But what's even more important is that when we draw that circle of love so small, so that's only about the couple, or about the individual, even smaller, when we forget that human sexuality is intrinsically linked with life, it's the children who are trampled. And so what happens is when it's only about you and me, and we engage in human sexuality apart from the idea of viewing human sexuality as the way we, in love, which we can't forget about either, share life to create new life, the children are destroyed. So I'd say that every child who is conceived has the right to be born into a home where both biological parents love each other, care about each other, want the child, and nurture the child. And what happens if, because of that, when I'm in a relationship with you, and we're not committed yet in life, if I want to and if you want to, in love of self-sacrifice, I sacrifice what I can do, what I want to do, for the sake of the child who could be intentionally or accidentally conceived, until I'm in a position to be able to give to that child what that child needs, a committed, loving relationship. And if I don't do that, what happens when the child comes along? Well, maybe we marry for the sake of the child, but we really don't love each other. And so we bring the child into a dysfunctional home with resentment, even towards the child. Or we have a broken home, where the biological parents aren't in a relationship. We have a single parent home. We have a shared home. Or sadly, we just murder the child because we don't want it, to the tune of 30 to 40 million a year in the world. And so these are the real tangible fruits of what happens when we distort human sexuality. So the challenge is now, how do we get that message, that positive message that it is about love out to the world? If all we do is say this is wrong and you're going to hell, people aren't listening. Whereas if we can bring up the idea, how many people who believe in cohabiting, who believe in gay marriage, who believe in all the current buzzwords of our life, grew up in broken homes, grew up as single parent families. And if we can reach to them, they know how much they would have given to grow up in a family with their mother and father who loved them and loved each other and gave them a household. They know that. And so if we can reach them there and say, it's for this reason, because the children are trampled, you know it, you've lived it, that there's a better way. And by that we can evangelize them and bring them to this truth in a way that's acceptable, that's attractive, that now makes them say, you're right. Why would I do to somebody else what happened to me? Let me change my life. Let me be faithful. Let me think about the children. Let me draw the circle of love much bigger than just you and me, and include those children who have the right to be born into a stable, loving household with both biological parents. So that's the way I see we are able to reach people and help them on their terms, meet them where they are, to then bring them to where they need to be, rather than just beating them over the head with, this is wrong, you're going to hell, which doesn't mean anything to them anymore.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that.
What a wonderful thing. If that's a large article or a small book right there. You take the teachings of the church and you synthesize them, in a personal way, which is valuable. So I would get that all down in writing and see what you can do with it. Wouldn't you?
It's all about supernatural grace,
Sure.
None of that can really happen without supernatural grace, and I think that's the key there, because that requires really what you're talking about, John. I think would require major conversion in their understanding and in their will. Right?
Well, even in RCIA, this is how often I've tried to approach this, that we know it's the case, but we don't immediately bring the subject up, which I sometimes am uncomfortable about because we know it's active sin.
Yeah.
What I'd rather do is first get them to know about God, because most don't. Move them to start to fall in love with God. And then when they understand this wonderful God who only wants good for them, who's only in love for them, and they've started to love back, now we can talk about, how do we imitate this love? How do we do what this God wants of us for the sake of others, not for arbitrary rules that just impede our freedom? And so now, and it's wonderful sometimes. I remember a couple I have so much respect for who were in this situation, and the woman came and she said, I'm embarrassed by this. I've got 4 children from 4 different fathers, and what I'm living with now, we're coming together, is not the father of any of them. I had to reassure, first of all, that all of those children were loved. If God didn't want them, he wouldn't have given them a soul. They were loved by God every moment.
You met the woman at the well, right? This is
Oh, she came. She was in RCIA. It was wonderful.
She was the modern day woman at the well, right? You have Jesus said you've had 5 husbands, and the one
Yeah.
you're with now
It's not.
isn't the husband. You're
But the wonderful thing was that they came to me and said, "Wait a second! You just read that scripture about in Matthew 5 about divorce and remarriage and committing adultery." And they said, "Well, we're in this situation." And they committed themselves to living chastely. They weren't in a financial position where they could separate the household, which is a challenge we often face, because we still have the issue of scandal, which has become less so because no one ever thinks of it anymore. But still, I so admired the fact that having come down this path, they came to us and said, "We are now going to live chastely because we embrace this, we believe it." I thought that was such a model for so many.
That's very exceptional. I think, what you're really talking about is love as a decision, as we always say, right? That it's really about decision and not feeling. Our feelings can't vote for us. And I think that the whole concept of what's going on out there is that people are not aware of, they're not educated. I just want to say that.
I was just going to agree with
were
you. Yeah, I was going to say a lot of us, we get to that first or second level that you were mentioning about not knowing about God, or that he loves us to that extent, or we're just kind of stuck in our sins, or we're stuck in, we can't get to that level. So then that's when we make decisions most of the time based on fear, or like, oh, I need to cohabitate with this person because of these reasons, and not, you know what I mean, like that kind of thing.
That I've seen even teaching 7th graders and 8th graders teaching younger generation is there's almost a lack of trust with marriage, because like you mentioned, some of them are coming from families that are either broken, or there's arguments at home, and so they begin to doubt marriage as something positive and viable, and they don't even see it as a sacrament anymore because their experience with it just doesn't make sense. And I remember I was sharing once with a friend of mine who's a Franciscan priest, and I said, I'm having a hard time getting some of the theology aspects to them. And he said, well, you can't teach them about God and having this loving Father, because in many cases they don't even have a loving Father here on earth. So how could they envision a loving Father in heaven that looks for them and cares for them? And so one of the things we're trying to do is, with them, get them to that point of understanding God and God's love. And then we're seeing, my wife and I seeing now with Pre-Cana, it used to be the traditional way of courting and then engagement and then marriage and home and then a child. And now we do meet a lot of couples who it's in reverse. There's a child, and then eventually they decide they should move in together. And then eventually from there they decide, well, we might as well get married because of this. But there's no trust in the institution of marriage, because the word marriage has changed so often. And so they don't see it as a sacrament. And we're in that same boat where now they're at Pre-Cana, and there's a reason they want to get married in church. We want them to get married in church. We want them to bring, if they have children, bring them to get baptized. We want them to see this as a big commitment and as a sacrament. But we first have to even go backwards to why are they there? And for a lot of them, it's tradition. My parents got married in a church, so I think we should get married in a church. But they don't understand what that means for their life moving forward. And we only have 4 nights with them. So we're really trying to institute to them, it's not just about that day, it's your marriage is the lifetime moving forward, and it's supposed to be within the church. It means that your marriage and your union isn't because grandma wants you to get married in the church that she got married in, or that, my father's paying for it and this is where he said we have to get married. It's, it's a commitment together, but it's a commitment that's blessed by God. And if he is part of that, then when children come along, if they have come along, they're also part of it. And I loved what you said, it's sacrifice and it's expanding that larger circle. And my wife and I will be married 17 years this November, and when we first were engaged, I was living in Virginia and my wife was here on Long Island, and we didn't cohabitate. It wasn't even a thought. It was, the thought at that time was, I'm going to drive 8 hours every weekend to Long Island, and every other weekend she'll drive to Virginia, and we'll spend time together that way. And even when she would visit me, she would bring a sibling, because that was the type of traditions that we grew up with our families. And we waited to get married and then have a house and then have children and things like that. So we just share our story with these younger couples now, in the hope that, not that we're saying what we did is the right way and the better way, but so they can see that, hey, it does work, and give them that example that sometimes, unfortunately society doesn't promote positive examples. So if we can do that with them, even in that, those 4 nights together, or share that with some of the younger kids we encounter, or just people we encounter at Mass. I mean, we get all the time people who say, I can't believe your kids still come to church, because they grew up that way. And if you can foster that, the love that you mentioned and the sacrificial aspect of it, then you can continue it, promoting it in a way that's not my way versus your way, or this is right and that's wrong. Because I think society gets too much into right and wrong, instead of looking at the benefits and the beauty of the relationships that can happen.
Absolutely. They reduce it to right and wrong, and that allows them to be politically correct and reject the wrong.
Yeah.
But I just want to jump off on that a little bit. As a counselor, one of the things I hear all the time, and it's kind of like I always forget that I just heard it, and every time I hear it, I draw a deep breath, and I'm like, oh my God, did I really hear that? But one of the things I hear all the time is, so we've decided to get married so that before the kids come. Like it's a decision, like it's actually been a decision. Yeah, we've decided to get married before the kids come. I can never absorb that or process that enough. It's just such a startling thing. What I wanted to mention was that we're in a covenant, right, with the Lord in our sacrament, and Jesus is as much a part of that covenant as our spouse is. And I know there were many times we were married 55 years.
Yay.
And, my husband had a joke. He would say, divorce I never would consider, homicide many times. but we had, those days when you just say, Jesus, I'm still hanging in with you. You're in this covenant, and I'm counting on you being here. And I'm not feeling too much like Dave's there right now, or he's not feeling like Barbara is, but you always know that the Lord is in the covenant. I think that's what makes it the sacrament. And so it's really about understanding His love, as John said, and as Severio said, understanding the Lord's love for us and allowing Him to love us. And once we're so bad at that, especially as Catholics, we always are striving to love God and showing everyone how we love God, showing ourselves more than anything how much we love God. And we kind of fail at the end of really receiving the Lord's love, which has to happen first.
Well, sure,
And
it's really something, because you just look at the sacramental books right now. We're baptizing a lot of children whose parents were not, number one, not married in church, but actually in many instances not married. You see, so finally when they get the baby, they decide we got to do something. And of course, in the so-called old days, oftentimes the priest would refuse to baptize the baby. But even Pope Francis weighed in on that one, and was encouraging everybody not to apply that old logic, but to get the baby baptized and try to motivate them to go further. But really, as a culture, it's not that we're now tolerating or encouraging or endorsing or validating something like gay marriage. We really messed up on the whole concept of marriage to begin with. And so the greater problem is that there's a small gay population, but there's a large, heterosexual population that doesn't understand the beauty and the depth of marriage. So we got our work cut out for us. This is great what you guys are saying. If you could put yourselves in together with a room with a lot of 20-somethings, you'd get action. You'd get response. You'd get comment and objection and wishing and all kinds of things. So it's I hope the word is getting out through you fellas somehow.
Thank you. That was great.
I hope more than 20-somethings. We get down to our teens and preteens.
Mhm.
And by then, it's far too late. They're already being formed, sadly, as preteens. And if all we do is give them information when they're in their 20s, as opposed to formation when they're 12 years old, it's far too late. You know,
Yeah.
and to bring them to that point so that they are truly formed, not just informed. You know, to know the beauty of the fact that when they marry, they don't marry someone to be the center of their life. They marry someone to share the center of their life. You know, when to understand this whole idea, if we'll only, hopefully we'll lead them to repentance if we don't get them early enough. We'd rather have them be able to have this wonderful purity. Was it St. John Bosco had this, among many dreams, he had this dream, I think, of this cart that he was following with all his boys from the school. And you can see that, you know, along the way, various boys would fall off. And some would fall off and just be lost on the wayside, and some would fall off and they would run after the cart. So that was good. They were still following where the cart was going, but they were never able to quite get back into the cart. And then when the meaning of the dream was revealed, if I recall correctly, the ones in the cart were the ones who had fully preserved their chastity and their virginity, you know, through whatever their stage in life was. The ones who had fallen off had lost it, but repented and followed after. And that was good, certainly better than the ones who just left, but it still wasn't quite the same as if they had never fallen out of the cart.
Yeah, I wanted to underscore that what John is saying about the age level that we need to reach, because sadly, and again in my counseling experience, so many 6th, 7th, and 8th graders are being sexually intimate with one
Yes.
another, and it's already in 6th grade we've lost them. So it's a very hard dance, you know. It's really we're Father Benedict Rochelle, before he passed on to the Lord, said something to me. It was one of the last conversations I had with him, and he said, it's not a black and white church anymore. And what he meant by that is it's so much harder to evangelize, you know. We really have to realize it's, you know, as we've been talking, I think this whole time, meeting people where they are, not shutting them down, not shutting them off. When people come to counseling, sometimes they immediately announce things that you're, oh my God. But you can't shut people down, because, you know, and the Lord gives us a lot of examples of that in Scripture. But your generation is grappling with this constantly.
Yeah, no, I was just, were you going to say a scripture that it had that example? I know I kind of jumped in, but...
No, I'm okay.
Oh, you're okay?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I was just thinking as the conversation was going, I thought of, I liked when John said before about opening the circle of love to make it wider, so that chastity, we could see it as, you could see it as you could see it as like a sacrifice, but it's a sacrifice that opens you up to be able to love. So it's a sacrifice for the good, for love, like you're choosing love. And I thought of how when you when you are married in the church, like a couple is married in the church, there's no better way to unite your bond than with the eternal sacrifice that Jesus did for everybody. So your marriage is also an example of that sacrificing love, that redemptive suffering, that outpouring of one another within the marriage, but also to help everybody through that example. And I thought of, Barbara, what encouragement can we give? Like, let's say somebody who has struggled with chastity or wants to go and follow the cart, and is there a way to jump back in the cart? You know, I'm thinking maybe somebody can extend their hand from the cart and then jump back in, you know?
Yeah, I think the greatest encouragement is people your own age, your peer group. I think, right? I'm so into young adults, because and I talk to a lot of young adults, and I just feel like that's where it's got to come from. We can know all these things and say it, but it's got to come from them. And once you see other people who have struggled with it, your age and have found another way, or just never struggled but just knew the other way, that's
That
going
gives
to
you
be
strength.
right?
Yeah,
Don't you think?
I was just gonna say, I was gonna mention about the coffee house.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I know I always keep mentioning it, but it's such a great thing. I went last night. It's for young adults in St. Francis of Assisi Church in Green Lawn, and it's just a little room that you can have coffee and hang out and just meet new people. I went by myself. I didn't know anybody. Just Giovanna who heads it, but we started just chatting and just kind of in a very relaxed environment.
Wasn't it a great little atmosphere down there?
Yeah, I mean, personally,
they were just chatting away. They were like
chatting the whole night away.
two bullfrogs in the pond, croaking back and forth at each other all night. That's just what they loved. We didn't have to have much of a program at all. We had a witness talk,
Yeah, witness
and a little
talk,
sharing.
which was
but
really
they
nice.
just wanted to be in one another's presence.
It's a safe place. It's a safe place.
I really
think.
felt that I grew in my faith and just felt really comfortable and just felt really safe, like you said.
I think that's so important that what we evangelize one another. I remember, when women used to hang clothes on a clothesline, mothers, stay-at-home moms, because we didn't work. This is going back to the 50s, I guess. And so now you just had a rough day with maybe your husband or your kids, but you're out at that clothesline in the morning. And the lady next door's out on her clothesline. And there it is. And she's telling you, oh, my husband drove me crazy, da-da-da. And you're telling her, and you're done. It's therapy. You're experiencing how one another dealt with it, and it's great. But we don't have those natural ways anymore. Like a coffee house creates a safe place or anything like that for people to just talk and share about, how difficult life can be and how the Lord broke through. They might not even recognize it as God, but as they share stories, don't you think that that's the exciting part of what goes on?
One girl said, I want to be with people who believe what I believe.
Right.
She's tired of the other thing of, sensing resistance and so forth. And you need refreshment. You need, so our motto is, let coffee be the instrument of your peace. It's a kind of clever enough to grab a young adult's attention.
And you, I understand, got some pizza down there last
we
night,
had some
too.
pizza
It was
down
really
there.
good. I had 2 pieces.
Enjoy that too.
Severia, you wanted to say something?
Just, you made a great comment about the idea of the clothesline. And nowadays, unfortunately, I think social media has really impacted that communication process between individuals, being able to form a relationship and share in a way that's open and trusting, where you can be vulnerable. Because now, with things like Facebook, people will share, but they'll only share if it either makes them look good, or if they're venting or they're conversing about something negative, will allow others to rally around them and make them feel better about the situation. So, somebody will complain about something and then they get excited because other people start complaining on it. And if you were to go in and say, well, try to be positive or try to share something that's good,
You're gonna not be looked on good.
So now in the public atmosphere, sharing something that's positive, that's valuable, that's inspirational, that's moral and ethically right, can put yourself in a position where you're getting beat up or you're put down because there's so many eyes on it and there's so many different views. And I think accepting other views is okay, and being understanding of other people's and listening.
To other views.
But I think with social media now, people become their own either targets or they create this fake identity that's just becomes a challenge to live into. And you see a lot of the younger generation, they're more and more exposed to so many things on there that they don't want to share openly and honestly with anyone because they're afraid of their image, and then they're afraid of what happens if this gets on Facebook. Oh my goodness, if other people see this, forget it.
And the fear of missing out, if I can just say that really quick, fast. We have something called FOMO now in our diagnosis. Maybe you've heard of that, but it's the fear of missing out. And our 3 granddaughters, 16, 18, 19, came to Medjugorje with us, and that was their biggest problem. I'm missing out. I don't know what's going on, and it's a tremendous tension that the world creates for us.
Yeah.
So I think that you're right. We need a place like a coffee house just in this case a coffee house, to just hang out and be safe.
Friday nights at St. Francis.
Yep. Thank you. Can you just, young adult wise, tell about Adore?
I was just going to say that, so there's a great event for young adults as well. This coming Friday at the Seminary of the Immaculate Conception at 7 o'clock, there's going to be adoration, confession, rosary, and just hanging out and mingling with young adults. So that's a great event.
And Adore, it's called Adore, which
Adore.
I love, because so many of our young people don't really understand what adoration is, and they've never really even experienced it. We were at the youth conference at Medjugorje, and so many kids were confused about, well, what's going on?
What is this?
What is
Yeah,
that
what do you
gold
do?
thing they're holding up? I mean, really, I have to. And they're in youth groups.
Yeah,
So
I didn't know about adoration until I was in my 20s. Like, I was never exposed to it, so I think it's such a beautiful thing to let people know earlier on, like, what it is, and bring them, if you have children, bring them to adoration, teach them, or, so.
And really, what is it but just being before the Lord? And you don't even have to come up with anything great, because He knows it all.
Being
Just
intimate
Being intimate.
with the Lord.
Without
And that
doing
should
anything.
teach us intimacy with one another.
You don't have to do anything, just
The right kind.
sit there and be.
So we didn't get to our other questions, but next week we'll have some more stuff that's really
Yeah.
exciting. We're going to talk about lying and,
Ooh.
yeah.
So it's not the end of the world, so.
I know, not yet, not yet.
Remember, the key line that Jesus says, you know not the day nor the hour.
Amen.
False messiahs will arise and say, and others will say, here he is, or there he is. Do not follow after them.
So,
But nonetheless, be aware of what other people think and listen lovingly to them.
Amen. God bless you. Have a great weekend, and thank you again. Sorry, I was hearing the music.
You
so
guys
I
are
was like,
great.
Yeah, good job.
Wow, you
It
guys
went
were
by